Just FYI. Thank you.
All right, shall we get going? They'll probably get a few more. We might as well get going. Welcome everyone to the Shift Bay Area monthly meeting. My name is Gus Mottlemal. I'm president of Shift Bay Area. SHIFT stands for Sustainability and Housing, Infrastructure, Finance, and Transportation. So we promote transparent, accountable, sustainable governance in those key areas. We focus on the 9 counties of the Bay Area, but we hope in time to encourage the formation of similar organizations in other parts of California. We've got a really exciting speaker for you today. We're going to get some context on one of the big things coming up this November, which is a 5-county transit tax to support BART and some other of the transit agencies. They claim they need that in order to survive. That's based on their plans, their sort of future plans. And so we're going to hear a lot today about planning and how planning works in transportation. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom Rubin, who's going to introduce our speaker. And then Randal will give us a great talk, and then I'll help manage the Q&A, and we'll go from there. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind.
Very good. First, I'll do the introduction. Randal OToole is a land use and transportation policy analyst with more than 50 years of experience reviewing governmental agencies and governmental plans, including transportation plans in Charlotte, Denver, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Phoenix, Portland, San Antonio, and San Jose, among other places. I've worked with him on more than one. He calls himself the Anti-Planner, has an outstanding website and blog, and has written several books critiquing government planning, including The Best Laid Plans, How Government Planning Harms Your Quality of Life, Your Pocketbook, and Your Future. Gridlock, Why We're Stuck in Traffic and What to Do About It. American Nightmare, How Government Undermines the Dream of Home Ownership. One of my favorites and one of his first ones. The Vanishing Automobile and Other Urban Myths, How Smart Growth Will Harm American Cities. And Romance of the Rail, Why the Passenger Trains We Love Are Not the Transportation We Need. So we're going to now start the presentation. I'm just going to go over the rules quickly. Okay, again, Randal has been introduced. We are recording, and press will be reviewing this. The questions will be through chat, and they will be held at the end. If you want clarification of something, put that in chat immediately. But longer questions, or what do you think about this, we'll save to the end. And then everything will be saved and put on our website. And then again, you see the contact points there, both for Randal and for Shift. And with that, I'm turning it over to Randal. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to start out by mentioning that we hear a lot about the supposedly powerful highway lobby, and maybe it was powerful back in the 1950s. But today, the American Public Transportation Association, which is the transit lobby, has a budget that is 5 to 6 times larger than all the Washington, D.C. highway groups combined. And they use this money to bombard us with propaganda, claiming that all transportation is subsidized and all foreign countries subsidize transit, so no one should question transit subsidies here. In other words, we're supposed to pay no attention to the fact that subsidies to urban transit are more than 200 times greater per passenger mile than subsidies to highways. This wasn't always the case. In 1964, the transit industry was mostly private and mostly profitable. Even public agencies such as San Francisco Muni were funded mainly if not entirely, out of their fare revenues. This changed because of an accident of history. In the 1950s, intercity passenger train ridership was rapidly declining, and the railroads blamed the problem partly on overregulation. Many cross-country trains served 8 or 9 states, and railroads wanting to cancel one train needed to get permission from every state that train served. They complained to Congress, and in 1958, Congress responded by passing a law allowing railroads to cancel intercity passenger trains by simply applying to the federal government instead of each state government. When Congress passed this law, it forgot that commuter trains in 4 urban areas, Boston, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, crossed state lines. So railroads started proposing to cancel some of those trains, and that turned in, at least the cities made an effort to turn that into a major crisis. National Magazine made the issue into their cover stories. And the mayors of those 4 big cities contributed to a book that said if the railroads were allowed to cancel those passenger trains, that would threaten the survival of America's metropolitan areas, when in fact it only threatened the survival of the downtowns of 4 cities. Now, the mayors, especially Mayor Daley of Chicago and Mayor Dilworth of Philadelphia, essentially told Congress, you created this problem, you have to fix it. And so in 1964, Congress passed the Urban Mass Transportation Act, here being signed by President Johnson. The law offered federal funding to any state or local governments that operated transit, not just those in the 4 urban areas that were threatened by the commuter crisis, and not just transit that crossed state lines, any transit. Within a few years, all the private transit companies in the country were taken over by public agencies. They started taxing local people using either sales taxes or property taxes, sometimes income taxes, but usually sales or property taxes, and then used that money plus the federal grants they got to buy whole new bus fleets, and in some cases to start planning new rail lines. We can see how well this did from this chart. Costs rapidly escalated. Capital costs grew, operating costs grew, ridership stagnated. Fares didn't grow very fast at all, and trips per urban resident between 1965 and 2019, trips per urban resident declined by 50%, and then, of course, plummeted even more with the pandemic. The average fare box recovery, meaning the percentage of operating costs covered by fares in Asia, is more than 100%. So it's not true that foreign governments all subsidize their transit. In Europe, fares cover 60% of the cost of operating transit. In Canada, it's 40%. In Australia, it's 30%. In the United States, it's less than 20%. We have the most subsidized transit in the world, but the transit advocates aren't satisfied with that. They want ever more subsidies. Currently, per capita, or rather in 2019, per capita operating subsidies average more than $200 per person in urban areas, and in San Francisco, it was $800 for every resident. By 2024, with the decline in ridership, that had risen to $400 a person nationwide, almost $500, and $1,400 per person in San Francisco. And that's the city of San Francisco. If we add in capital costs, it's much, much more. The per person costs nationwide are about $300 in 2019 and were $1,100 in San Francisco. They rose to well over $500 in 2024, and in San Francisco, more than $2,000. Every single person in San Francisco pays more than $2,000 effectively to subsidize Muni and BART and the other transit systems that serve San Francisco. Now, the transit advocates say that we need to do this because transit saves the planet from greenhouse gases. Well, it turns out that's not really true. On average, transit generates more greenhouse gases than driving the average automobile. But the average automobile in San Francisco isn't the average nationwide. As of 3 years ago, which is the latest data I could find, more than a third of the cars in San Francisco were electric cars. And they only generate about a third as much greenhouse gases per passenger mile as BART, and far less than any other transit system in the Bay Area. So getting people out of their gasoline cars and into electric cars has been a successful way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Trying to get people out of their cars and onto transit has failed, partly because transit ridership really hasn't been increasing. Another thing that transit advocates like to say is that transit promotes economic development. They especially like to see what they call transit-oriented developments, which are, as I'm sure you know, 5- and 6-story behemoth apartment buildings that supposedly reduce the amount of driving people do. In fact, they do nothing of the kind. First of all, a study funded by the Federal Transit Administration found that transit does not promote economic development. At best, it moves it around to different parts of the urban area. And usually, the economic development that you see taking place along transit lines gets its own subsidies on top of the transit subsidies. As for transit-oriented developments, they often require subsidies because most people want to live in single-family homes, not in apartment buildings. And research has also shown that they've done little to change transportation habits. According to UC Irvine economist David Brownstone, the effect of such developments on transportation is too small to be useful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Transit advocates also say that subsidies are necessary to help low-income people. But most Bay Area transit commuters earn more than $75,000 a year, which is the highest income category measured in the census data I'm using here. And people who earn that much money don't need to be subsidized, yet when we subsidize transit, we're subsidizing all of them. When you look at the percentage of people who are riding transit to work by income level, it's a little bit higher in the $15,000 to $25,000 category, but essentially 90% of low-income people don't ride transit to work, and they probably don't ride transit much at all. Since the taxes that are being used to subsidize Bay Area transit are highly regressive, this means that 90% of low-income people are disproportionately paying for transit rides they aren't taking. That's not fair, and it's not good for low-income people. Now, we can look at Bay Area transit ridership, and BART has been doing okay, and Caltrain has been doing okay. Muni, however, carried more riders in the early 1990s than it did in 2019 before the pandemic. AC Transit and VTA also carried a lot more riders in the early 1990s than in 2019. And then, of course, ridership crashed with the pandemic. Now, when we look at numbers in 2019, we can see that transit commuting greatly outnumbered remote working in every county, every one of the 5 core counties in the Bay Area. With the pandemic, however, that changed. In every county except for San Francisco County, remote working hugely outnumbers transit commuting. And what happened was most transit commuters go to downtown, and since downtown is where the place where most people ended up remote working, the remote working disproportionately affected transit, more than it affected driving, more than it affected walking, bicycling, and other kinds of commuting. So transit was especially hurt by remote working, and yet we're supposed to keep subsidizing it even though people aren't riding it. Now, if we look at individual agencies, starting with Muni, we can see that riders, as of 2024, were about 23% lower, actually almost 30% lower than it was in 2019. To account for that, they reduced service by 5%, not a great deal. But despite the 5% reduction in service, the operating costs rose by 30%. And what they call general administration, which is administrative overhead or the bureaucracy, more than doubled in cost. And in fact, almost 55% of the increase in operating costs was due to the growth in general administration. So while people weren't riding transit and their revenues were declining, the bureaucracy was having a big party. When we look at BART, it's almost the same story. Ridership was way down, almost 50% in 2024. It reduced service a tiny amount, but its operating costs grew by 30%, and its administrative overhead costs grew by more than 50%, and that accounted for almost 50% of the increase in operating costs. Samtrans, not quite as bad. Ridership was only down by about 15%. They reduced service by about 15%. Despite that, operating costs and administrative overhead grew by 40 to 60%. Well over half the increase in operating costs was bureaucratic overhead. AC Transit, about 25% fewer riders in 2024 than 2019. They reduced service by 16%. Administrative overhead and operating costs grew by 20%. At least the overhead didn't grow by more than total operating costs. VTA, Tom Rubin and I are fond of calling VTA the worst managed transit agency in the country, and its management of the BART to San Jose construction project would confirm that. So I'm surprised that its operating costs rose by only 16% and its administrative overhead actually declined. Whoops. And that indicates that, at least they aren't bloating out their bureaucracy there. Tom suggests maybe it's because they're putting all the bloat in the BART to San Jose capital project, whose costs aren't included here. Now, if we look at BART's budget, they say they've got a $550 million hole in their budget. They're carrying about 50% fewer riders than they were carrying in 2019. So instead of raising taxes, we can reduce the frequency and length of BART trains by 25% each, which would save about $350 million. We can reduce overhead back to what the overhead costs were in 2019. That saves $90 million. Interestingly, I'm suggesting that we increase the number of operating employees by 10%. That would be enough to save $60 million on overtime. And finally, we can increase fares a little bit to generate $60 million in new revenues. Those 5 policies alone would close that $550 million gap completely without raising taxes at all. Now you can do this same kind of analysis for the other agencies, and I'll leave that for the viewers. But this is just a short-term solution. The long-term problem is more serious, and it's the reason why transit has failed, the reason why ridership has declined despite $2 trillion in subsidies since 1965 is simple. Transit is too slow. We can see here that BART and Caltrain go at reasonable speeds, but all the buses and light rail in the region go anywhere from 6 to 14 miles an hour. That's just not fast enough to get people out of their cars. The second thing is transit doesn't go where people want to go. Transit, especially the BART system, but also Muni and also VTA, are mainly oriented to getting people into downtown San Francisco. 120 years ago, that's made sense. That's where the jobs were. But the jobs aren't in downtown anymore. Downtown San Francisco has less than 15% of the jobs in the region. Downtown Oakland has only 1% of the jobs in the region. VTA funnels its light rail and buses into downtown San Jose, and it has even fewer jobs than Oakland. Less than 3% of all the jobs in Silicon Valley are in downtown San Jose. And so funneling all these trains and buses into downtown is just a waste. And of course, it's a bigger waste when they build the BART line to downtown San Jose. As I say, 120 years ago, most jobs were downtown. Most urban jobs were in factories, and those factories were in downtowns. But with the development of assembly line methods, especially moving assembly lines, factories moved to the suburbs. And today, most jobs are in the suburbs. A lot of them are in what are called edge cities. About 30 to 40% of jobs are in economic centers, mostly in the suburbs, and you can call them edge cities. I'll just call them economic centers. And Bay Area Transit, all the transit systems combined, carry half the people who work in downtown San Francisco to work, but less than 7% of workers in the rest of the region take transit to work, because transit doesn't even try to take people into the edge cities, into the other economic centers in the region. Now, I was asked to look at San Jose and VTA's route plan to see how we could fix this. And I said, what we need is to speed up transit, and we need to serve all the economic centers as well as VTA currently serves downtown San Jose. So I said, identify 6 or 8 or 10 economic centers. The main ones connect every single major economic center, shown here with red stars, to every other economic center, major economic center, with nonstop buses going on freeways at freeway speeds from economic center to economic center. The blue stars are secondary economic centers. They don't have quite as many jobs, so we have nonstop buses going from the blue star centers to at least 2 red star centers as well. And then have the yellow lines show local buses radiating away from each economic center to provide blanket coverage to the entire area. Overall, this would more than double transit speeds. It would make it possible to get from one end of the urban area to the other at freeway speeds. And if we could only get 1/3 of the market share that downtown transit currently has for downtowns, for these other economic centers, it would triple transit ridership. I've developed plans like this for a lot of urban areas. Needless to say, none of them have been adopted yet. But there is a gentleman named Jarrett Walker who lives in Portland. Coincidentally, he grew up in a few blocks from where I grew up, and he's come up with his own plans. And he has the ear of transit agencies. He's convinced 8 or 10 transit agencies to follow his plan. His plan doesn't speed up buses, but it reroutes buses so that they're all on a north-south or east-west grid. And most of them don't try to reach downtown. But with this north-south and east-west grid, you can take a bus from anywhere in the region to any other place in the region, only have to transfer once. You get there pretty directly, but it's not fast because it's still on street speeds instead of freeway speeds. The cities that have adopted this have seen increases in ridership. So cities all over the country know that changing their route maps can have an impact, but very few of them are interested in doing that. Why is that? It's because most agencies, and BART was the exception, most agencies don't get much of their money from fares. Their operating costs are 80 to 90% paid for by taxpayers. And so they're more beholden to politicians than they are to transit riders. And when you look at capital and operating costs, you see that 90 to 95% of costs are covered by taxpayers. So the agencies do what the politicians want to do, which is build big, glitzy, expensive projects that don't get many people out of their cars and onto transit, rather than do cheap things that might increase transit ridership a lot more. That's the incentives the agency has, and what it comes down to is that transit is not suffering from a shortage of money. It has too much money, and it's doing the wrong things with it, and it's not insulated from its bad decisions. The worse decisions it makes, the more money Congress and the state and local taxpayers give it. So the best way to fix transit is to reduce the subsidies and let the transit agencies go out and figure out how to get more riders on their own. Now, Tom mentioned my website. It's called The Anti-Planner. The address is ti.org/antiplanner, but if you just do DuckDuckGo for Anti-Planner, I'm the first or second thing on the list. And if you look at various posts that I've got made, most of them cover the subjects that I've raised here. And if you look on the right-hand menu, there's something called Useful Data. Click on that, and you can get all the data files that I've used in this presentation. If you go up to the menus, there's a menu called Special Features, and one of them is called Policy Briefs. You look at that, and there's 150 briefs about transit and transportation and housing issues. I've also, as Tom mentioned, written several books. I encourage people to go to the Anti-Planner website and look at all of the papers I've written. You can click on Thoreau Institute, Cato Institute, American Dream Coalition to get a list of all the papers, and they're all downloadable for free. If you want to buy the books, I recommend going to bookfinder.com to get the best price you can. So that's it.
Wow, that was a great presentation, Randall. I learned a lot in that. I loved by the way, I just loved the map where you mapped out the connections of the various economic centers. I serve on San Mateo County's Transportation Authority as a citizens council, and I have said there many times if we were ever going to get serious about transit, we should get rid of most, if not all, of the trains and have a lot more buses. I think that'd frankly do a lot more for low-income people than trains. It was encouraging to see that there seems to be that maybe that's not a crazy thing to say, although nobody else in that room seems to agree with me on that point. Let's see. So do some questions here from the chat. Let's see. Some of them already got addressed, it looks like. Hang on, just give me 1 second.
And if anyone wants to raise their hand, go down to the React button, raise your hand, and we'll unmute you.
Okay, let's unmute Ed here.
But you can definitely go through the chat, guys.
Yeah, I will do that. Ed, go ahead while I'm looking through the chat here.
Hi, I had never heard of this group. I'm glad to find you. Sounds like-minded folks. Specifically with this issue, I'd like to bring up a couple other points that weren't touched on. Number one, the agencies, I think we have 27 agencies in the Bay Area. You talk about overhead, that's clearly a problem. And it's never going to go away if you have 27 different agencies essentially doing the same thing in tiny municipalities. The amount of duplication and bloat is there. In addition to that, the routes aren't coordinated. And when people want to go outside of their local municipality, they are not going to be well served. Okay, so that's just one point. The second point, the even bigger point, is in America, we don't have high density, and there's a million reasons for that. But when you don't have high density, in my view, old-fashioned public transit paradigms just aren't going to work. They will always require massive subsidies, and it's just not going to work. So, in my view, technology now gives us the tools to leapfrog the entire problem and essentially go to public Waymo as our de facto transportation future. So we can use our phones to book rides point to point, and offer a service that's vastly superior to any kind of public transit model, any kind. Okay, so there are many ways we can do this. The technology is only going to get better and better, but ultimately the majority of distributed rides in a suburbanized context are going to be in this model. The train lines, the bus lines, none of that is going to be very efficient ever. So yes, we need to cut the subsidies and we need to go to a model that actually works. And I think we have, we are getting the tools to do so now. So thank you.
Ed, if I may ask, how did you find us? And what is your background?
Oops. Hi. Yeah, no, I am actually a public servant. So I have seen this from the inside. I know how inefficient the government bureaucracies can be. The other thing I didn't mention, frankly, is unions. The biggest part of the bloat here is probably from unions. And I am a union member. I am a beneficiary of this. But I can tell you that's the vast majority of the bloat. And I'm an engineer, by the way. Let's see. I found you through some Facebook groups because I have actually already written some about similar issues. And I know that increasing taxation over and over and over again is simply not sustainable. The model itself is outdated, it's inefficient, and any amount of subsidization is just not gonna keep it running in the long term.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Just to
Ed makes
build
some
on.
good points, and I'd like to respond a little bit. He mentions 27 agencies, and that can be a problem, but it's also true that smaller agencies tend to have less overhead. I remember Portland is a 3-county area, and the counties were generating all kinds of districts for here and there. And somebody said, we need to consolidate these districts. And so 2 of the counties did a mass consolidation, and 1 county just had more and more districts all the time. And it ended up the county with the most districts had the lowest administrative overhead overall, had the lowest taxes and everything else. So merging isn't the solution. Maybe a solution would be for agencies to share, you could buy a ticket on one and use that transfer to the next agency and so on so that you can have some more coordination. But merging the agencies isn't necessarily going to fix it. As you know, all the counties in the San Francisco Bay Area have urban growth boundaries. They have massively increased the density. The San Francisco Bay Area has the second highest density of any urban area in the country. Only Los Angeles is denser. That hasn't been enough to significantly boost transit ridership. Yes, density may help if you can get to inner Paris levels of density or Manhattan levels of density, but San Francisco's nowhere close to that. I know you probably agree with that, Ed, but when you talk about density, the agencies will think smugly, well, we're doing everything we can to increase density. It's not working, but what they are succeeding is doing is making housing less and less affordable all the time. Unions are an issue. One of the things I suggested is that more people be hired so they won't have to pay overtime. Unions will strenuously object to that because they like their members getting a lot of overtime. The administrative bloat I was talking about, though, was the executive suite. They aren't unionized, and they were the ones that were bloating by 100% in the case of Muni. So it wasn't unions that were responsible for that. I'd like to mention that somebody named Libby has left a message on the chat. She says, I respectfully disagree with the idea that it doesn't take you where you want to go. I take Bart and Muni to every Giants game. They take me to the Chase Center. The interconnection between Barton Muni and Barton AC have been working fine for a long time. And I would say, lucky you, Libby. You're very lucky that you can take transit where you want to go. I'm sure you have designed your lifestyle. You've located your housing in a place where you can do that. But guess what? It doesn't work for 90% of the people in the Bay Area. It's working for you, and you're one of the 10%. And because it works for you, you think everybody else should pay for subsidize? I can't see that. I think people should pay their own transportation costs. If they're really low income, we can give them transportation vouchers. They can use it for taxis or Uber or transit or whatever they want to use it for. But the idea that we should subsidize transit systems that won't take 90% of people where they want to go because they're too stubborn to change their systems, I can't buy that.
Just to build on something Ed said and calling on Greg, I also have often said that we can either have a transit system that as a byproduct of providing transit also provides jobs, or we can have a jobs program that as a byproduct of being a jobs program happens to provide some transit. And I think we should have the first thing, but what we actually have is the second thing. And that's unfortunate. But anyway, Greg.
I just wanted to point out that there is some serious academic research on the issue of consolidation and efficiencies in public works. The first woman to win a Nobel Prize was Eleanor Ostrom. Actually, the Nobel Prize in economics was not named that when she won it, but her work is cited as showing that bigger organizations are not always more efficient. Clearly, if you're consolidating sewer districts, you're not going to save a mile of pipe. What she showed is that we need polycentric governance, many overlapping local decision-making units, which can often outperform a single centralized bureaucracy because the local actors possess better information and stronger incentives. And I can speak to here on the coast in San Mateo, our little socialist water district is much more efficient and much more focused than the bigger districts, around us. So there can be times when there are economies of scale, but often you just get a bureaucracy that's out of touch. And that was a Nobel Prize winning 2009 award. Thanks.
Awesome.
And if I can comment, Gus,
yeah.
I put in the chat a sign-up form for people like Ed, who we got through social media. We may not get these people again because sometimes I can't hit the same site. So if you could sign up, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Let's see. If anybody else had a question in the chat that I missed, go ahead and raise your hand because I don't know that I see any others in the chat. But
my friend Libby has another comment here. She asked if I want to force people into AV cars. Maybe we don't want to be forced. Well, I never said force. I said, let's give some incentives, which is what we've been doing until recently for electric vehicles, and that those incentives helped increase the percentage of vehicles in the Bay Area to well over a third. It's probably half today, but as of 3 years ago, it was a third. I also like autonomous vehicles. I like them a lot. I don't want to force people into them. I want to allow more on the road. Autonomous vehicles are compatible with other vehicles on the road. So giving people incentives for reducing greenhouse gases seems to work better than giving transit agencies huge subsidies to build expensive projects that generate huge amounts of greenhouse gases. That's my position.
Awesome. Mike just asked a question about Muni employee compensation costs, which I guess there's more transparency in that in some of the other agencies, but not in Muni. Is there a particular reason why Muni is less transparent about that?
Tom, do you have an answer to that?
Well, we now have good data on virtually every single local government in California. But among the transit agencies, BART is by far the highest. Their total compensation was well in excess of 150,000 a year, and there's a very large number that are among over 300 or 400,000. Muni is slightly lower, but only slightly. And one of the reasons is Muni has a larger number of less technical jobs. So all in all, the median compensation for the bigger transit agencies is way above the median compensation for the people that are paying the taxes to support them.
Interesting.
Libby has another comment, and I think there is some misunderstanding of who is saying what.
Well, Libby says that I'm misinterpreting her. She says BART was designed mainly for computers, and it works for that. Now, according to the American Community Survey, which is conducted every year by the Census Bureau, the BART carried about 75,000 people in the San Francisco Bay Area to work in 2024. That was about 4% of all commuters in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it works for 4% of people. It doesn't work for 96% of people. You know, I've ridden BART. It's a neat system. I love trains. I love riding trains. But if it doesn't work for most people, then most people shouldn't have to pay for it. And there's this myth that the transit industry spreads that everybody benefits even if they don't use transit. And I'm trying to say, no, you don't benefit. It hurts low-income people. It doesn't help protect the environment. And it doesn't relieve congestion. It doesn't do all the other things that are supposed to be claimed for it.
I'm just going to quickly echo Mark's two plugs that he put in the chat. One, that Steve Glazer will be at the Cocoa Tax lunch this coming Friday at Concord. And he put a link in there if you want to sign up for that. Steve Glazer is a great presenter. He's worth going to hear. And that two, if what you've heard today has inspired you to not be excited about the transit tax that will be on your ballot this November, the sort of headquarters for the opposition for that is at transitaccountability.com. The link for that is also in the chat. So it is going to be a pretty big tax increase. So it's worth making sure you've done your research on that one before you just listen to what the MTC is going to have to say about it. So let's see. Do we have any other questions or comments? Anybody want to raise their hand? If not, then I will turn it over now to Mark, if he's still here, he's still there, to just give us a quick heads up on kind of So again, for folks who are interested in potentially joining the opposition to this tax, he'll give a quick update on kind of where that sort of that process is. And I will ask him to unmute. Great.
Great. Thanks, Gus. Yes, at Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, we have just set up the Committee for Affordable Bay Area Transit, and we are starting to raise money for that, and we'll be coordinating volunteers to post on social media, to put up yard signs, and to do other activities to oppose the tax. We have an initial volunteer meeting Thursday, the 25th at 7 o'clock. If you're interested in participating in that, please contact me at marc, at cocotax.org, and I'll drop that address into the chat. So that's what we're up to, Gus.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Any other final questions for Randal? If not, I want to thank you.
There's a question here. Libby asks, where are you getting your numbers? Where do you get 75,000 is only 4% of commuters in the Bay Area? Well, that number comes from what's called the American Community Survey, which the Census Bureau does every year. And they ask people, among many other questions, how do you get to work? And about 75,000 people in the San Francisco Bay Area, which includes San Francisco, Oakland, and urbanized portions of Alameda, Contra Costa, San Mateo, and Marin counties, but it does not include Santa Clara County, which is its own urban area. And anyway, that 75,000 is 4% of the total number of commuters in those urbanized portions of those 5 counties, including Marin County.
Thank you for that explanation. Awesome. Any other questions for Randal? I see Ed's got his hand up. Here, let me see if I can mute. Go ahead, Ed.
I just I don't want to be misunderstood. When I talk about consolidation, it's really just for transit, because by its nature, transit is a regional service. So it's very important that it be served with a regional agency. I don't expect the city of Sunnyvale to care one bit about my commute that goes to San Leandro, okay, and have them talk to San Leandro or whatever. So again, for transit, regional focus is essential. But more importantly, realize this: our children are going to be using something like Waymo. 20 or 30 years from now, everybody's going to be using Waymo. You can publicly subsidize that as much as you want, and you will still save money compared to building trillion-dollar networks of rail and bus systems that will not even provide the level of service that something like Waymo will. This will happen. Okay, our kids will do this. The only question now is how many trillions will we waste on the old model before we shift to the new? That is the question. And as far as I'm concerned, it should be as little as possible. So that's why I'm here today. And I just don't want to waste more money. I am a public servant. I am also an environmentalist. I have been my entire life. It has nothing to do with identity politics. This is reality. My child, he doesn't want to learn to drive. Okay, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Hold out long enough and you will never have to learn to drive. Okay, so that is the future. Let's embrace it. Let's move toward it. Let's make it as efficient as possible. And let's stop wasting money on outdated models. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Mark?
Yeah, just to build on something that Ed said, here in the East Bay, we have 6 different bus agencies. AC Transit is fairly large, but the other 5 are very small. And the question becomes, can we save money from getting rid of duplicate management? I mean, we could still have a local, highly responsive agency to the extent that we think that the agencies we have are highly responsive. And then the second thing, and along the point about Waymo, we don't need to have buses with 3 or 4 people sitting in them, occupying our roads. We can have more point to point, as Denise said in one of her comments, last mile service that's going to be more convenient for riders and ultimately is going to save money. And while I know that a couple of people on this call are very uncomfortable with this, the fact is that ultimately we're going to enjoy a lot of savings by moving that over to driverless. And as more and more people become comfortable with driverless, that opposition is going to fall away. I know, people were very uncomfortable when elevators that didn't have an operator started to become popular. I mean, seems very dangerous. But ultimately, we all now use, we use automatic elevators. This is just the way society changes, and I think we should be less resistant to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Greg?
There are other transit modes that work. For instance, you can take a bus from Nashua, New Hampshire to the Logan Airport in Boston every morning, express trip, affordable fares, and not drive and not park. There's a network called FRAN, Free Rides Around the Neighborhood, down in Anaheim. It's largely funded by the Anaheim Convention Center, Disneyland, and the ballpark there. And these van pools, or whatever you want to call them, shuttle buses, work just fine. And some of you may remember airport shuttle buses, where you would call in advance and book a ride, and it would come pick you up along with a half dozen other people and take you to the airport. And I can foresee a mode of transit, and I think we should hold a session on this in the future, what transit could look like. But you could use your smartphone to either real time, like you would book an Uber, or in advance, schedule something that will pick you up and take you where you want to go, and use the computers to figure out what a rational pickup span is and how many people are going to go to the same grocery store or whatever. And that stuff is amazingly cheap. In fact, the cheapest operating cost per passenger mile in the state of California, a study by Mark Jaffe showed, was a van pool. So there are other things we can do that don't put everybody in their own car, and yet still markedly increase convenience and reduce cost.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. Ed?
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to monopolize things, but I just want to clarify, when I say Waymo model, I'm talking about shared Waymo. So multiple people can get in one Waymo and take trips like the previous speaker just talked about. There will be efficiencies that can be captured by, I hate AI, but I'm going to say AI. AI will know, when people want to go from this point to this point, and it will be able to cluster rides. So you can have 4 people in a Waymo going from their neighborhood to their workplace efficiently and conveniently without having to take 2 or 3 buses and waiting and transferring and all that sort of thing. And I want to emphasize, this is a superior service for seniors in particular. Seniors should not have to take bus transfers, okay? Because you have to walk to the bus station, you have to wait at the bus station, you have to climb up the stairs. Sometimes there's not a seat for you. It's not a good service for seniors. Seniors, more than anyone or the disabled, should have point-to-point car-based service, and a subsidized Waymo model will give it to them. No public transit system currently in place can do that. When you have to climb up a bus platform, a train platform, walk to these transfer points, it is a hassle. I don't like to do it myself. I certainly wouldn't want my mother to do it. Okay, so this is a superior service at a better public price. So let's orient ourselves to a better future here.
Thanks, Ed. Other questions for or comments for Randal? If not, I want to turn it over to Greg to give us a quick preview of some future Shift seminars that we've got on deck.
Yeah, thanks to Randal and to Tom Rubin. We hold these meetings every month. In coming months, we're going to have a session on what's pushing cities over the fiscal cliff. And I suspect we're going to have more sessions on transit, including the vision we just described for an alternative transit system, because we have to give people a vision of what the big, bright, beautiful tomorrow would be, and not just the fear of losing an established bureaucracy.